Welcome, everyone. My name is Sherry Chaney Jones. I am the founder and CEO of Sure Impact. Sure Impact is a online cloud-based software solution that helps nonprofits, government, social enterprises, foundations, and funders track, measure, and communicate their unique impact and value. And I'm joined here with my colleague, Director of Marketing, Laurel Rodriguez. Laura will be monitoring your questions in the chat, or if you have any technical questions, please feel free to reach out to Laurel. But I want to get started today with our special guest. So today we are going to take the pulse and we're going to share with you nonprofit impact solutions in 2024 and beyond, and really talk about what we're seeing on the ground in terms of the importance of impact measurement, how you can use impact measurement, trends we're seeing in impact measurement. And I thought it was no better person to invite to this conversation than my colleague, Lauren Vanderpool. I've been following Lauren on social media for a while. So if you don't follow Lauren on social media, go to LinkedIn right now and find her posts, because her content is spot on. It is so good. You might not know how much I enjoy social impact solutions, social media, but really great stuff. So it's my honor and privilege today to introduce our special guest, Lauren Vanderpool. All too often, and I know this from my work too, organizations are under-resourced and they feel like they have to settle for suboptimal systems and outcomes. Lauren is extremely passionate, like I am, about helping organizations succeed by adopting best practices to enhance organizational growth, reach, and overall impact. Lauren has a background in public health and evidence-based research. So she leverages her experience in those areas to help organizations better understand how they can measure their impact and communicate this information to stakeholders in a clear and compelling manner. So if you need help measuring and or marketing your organization's impact, Lauren and Social Impact Solutions team are eager to serve you. And we, Lauren, are very eager to learn more about what you have to share with us today. So welcome to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks so much for getting this set up. And I'm really excited to chat with you today and, answer any questions that come in through the chat. And I know it's going to be a great conversation, and hopefully everyone learns a lot about impact measurement and marketing. And obviously social impact solutions and Sure Impact have a lot of overlap and complement each other nicely. So I'm looking forward to today. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. And Laurel, could you do me a favor so we can see Lauren's great face, and we'll just hopefully the two of us can maybe if I pin you, you can be front and center. There you go. I'll pin you. All right. So there is Lauren's beautiful face. So let's get started. You have been so where we do. You're right. Sure Impact and Social Impact Solutions have a lot of synergies and overlap. And I think why I love what you're doing so much is the fact that it is the world that I came from. Had been doing program evaluation, impact management, consulting for 20 years before launching Sure Impact. But you are on the ground now where I am not. You're working day in and day out, like helping organizations really start to measure their impact. We kind of get them once they're ready to have a technology solution to measure their impact. So what are some of the biggest challenges you see nonprofits facing or experiencing when it comes to measuring and communicating their impact today?
Definitely. Yeah. So I know that lots of people on the call may be exploring Sure Impact, maybe already using Sure Impact. I know that we have people from lots of different places geographically, but obviously different phases of the impact measurement process. So I'll speak to a few of the challenges that we see through social impact solutions with our clients. And first and foremost is that too many organizations don't have adequate or any impact data to begin with. And so, if there is no data being captured, then obviously there's nothing to report, there's nothing to communicate. And so that's what we see most often. That's obviously not always the case, but Sherry, a few meetings ago when you and I talked, I think you said that only about 25% of organizations are actually actively capturing data So that's still the biggest issue that we see. Obviously, we're biased just given the clientele that we work with. We help organizations measure and market their impact. And so we're seeing more of that than maybe others are, but it's definitely the biggest barrier and the biggest challenge is not having data to begin with. We know that this is because of a variety of challenges, particularly for nonprofit organizations, whether they don't have adequate personnel, like and not enough employees, maybe they don't have robust enough technology systems in place. This is obviously oftentimes due to budget, but the great news is that there are more and more tools being offered, Sure Impact being one of those, and at a much more affordable price. So technology is improving, expanding, and ultimately reducing the cost for nonprofits and for-profits alike. But there are more and more options available to reduce this burden and make impact measurement more feasible for nonprofits of all shapes and sizes. Second, I would say to answer your question, Sherry, the second biggest challenge that we see is that organizations that do have data often struggle to turn that into, practical, implementable tools, particularly when it comes to communication. So whether that's marketing or fundraising, communicating your impact metrics and turning that data into actionable and tangible collateral is a real challenge for a lot of organizations that have started capturing data. Sometimes this is due to the fact that many organizations are just kind of capturing anything and everything that they can, and they end up with so much data that they don't know what to use or how to use it or how to analyze it. We see some organizations that, they're not sure if their data is reliable, or they don't know, how do we use this in a way that's going to connect with donors or volunteers or other stakeholders. So those would be the pieces that we see most often is as challenges, is that data not being captured at all, or if it is, it's really challenging to communicate that in a way that resonates with all of your stakeholders. This conversation today and often will revolve a lot around funding and donors, but we know that all stakeholders, employees, constituents, beneficiaries, corporate partners, volunteers, they're all very important and they all really care about the impact being made through your organization's mission.
That's great. So I'm going to ask a question that I might not have told you I was going to ask, but before we get into really talking about how do we communicate, and because you said that's the second challenge is people have a lot of data, or maybe they started to collect data, but they don't know how to communicate it in a way that drives action. But if we do know that really one of the first starting points or barriers is people don't know, they don't have that impact or outcomes data to begin with. How do you work with those nonprofits to help them overcome that first challenge?
That's a great question. Very practically speaking, we start with a strategy session. Some people love that, some people hate it, but it gives us a great understanding of where an organization is at and what their capacity is. And it also helps organizations understand, where they're at as well and where they're wanting to go. So on the impact measurement side, we start with an impact strategy session. Typically, we walk organizations through a theory of change exercise. If you already have a theory of change, then, we would just review what you have. But that's a great tip, start with a theory of change and we like to make sure that, your goals and objectives and your KPIs are all aligned with your theory of change, that they're all measurable, that you're using validated and reliable assessment tools, not just that you're, coming up with survey questions on the fly. So that's where we start is with an impact strategy session and just helping organizations find tools, softwares, databases. And then also another piece that we like to advocate for, whether you work with us or not, there's so much secondary data. So primary data being what you gather in-house, with your organization, secondary data being, what you can find again through reliable sources. So the World Health Organization, the CDC, national or internationally accredited education organizations. You can find so much secondary data to help, explain the problem that your organization is aiming to solve, to help funders and other stakeholders better understand the need and the scale of your mission. So those are all sort of the preliminary steps that we take to help organizations start to measure their own impact and also use outside data when they don't have any to start with.
That's great advice. Yes, absolutely. Theory of change. We always say start with the theory of change to help you align those outcomes and impacts. So great advice. So let's say they've come to you, they've worked with you, you've helped them develop your theory of change. Hopefully you've helped them implement Sure Impact to help them, systematize how they're collecting that data. But can you tell us, so I know I learn best from stories, and I'm sure most people do. So an organization that had a really great communication strategy for their impact data, kind of just walk us through an organization that has done that really well that we can be inspired by.
Sure. Absolutely. So again, I always like to address biases, and I know that we, being social impact solutions, we have those ourselves. We are StoryBrand certified. So for anyone on the call that is familiar with StoryBrand as a marketing and communication framework, that is a communication strategy that we advocate for. It works very well, and it makes communication really clear, whether you're implementing impact data or not. StoryBrand is a great way to communicate clearly and concisely to really any audience. So whether you're communicating to volunteers, donors, your beneficiaries. So that would be first and foremost. Organizations that we have seen do this really well. They are using the StoryBrand framework. And ultimately, what that means is they are not making themselves or their organization the hero, if you will. They are, helping donors see how donors are the hero in their mission. They're helping volunteers see how, volunteers are the hero in their mission. Same with their internal employees, so that's something that's overlooked a lot of times. Nonprofit employees are not necessarily a part of this conversation too often, and they care a lot about the impact that's being made within their organization. And we know that nonprofit employee turnover rates are really, really high right now. And I believe that that's a huge part of it, is, they're not feeling connected with the work that's being done. And so reminding internal and external stakeholders how they're playing a critical role in your mission and how they are making, how they're making change, how they're helping your organization or your mission create lasting change. So that's what we see work very well, is taking the StoryBrand framework and applying it to nonprofit marketing and communication strategies and incorporating impact metrics into those strategies. Again, this boils back to clear communication. So, donors want to know, we're getting close to end of year, and I know we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But if you can help a donor understand whether this is a recurring donor, a past donor, a prospective donor, hey, if I give $50, this is what it's going to, and this is the program, and this is the specific action that's going to take place. If I give $500, same thing. You're helping them understand what they're giving to and what change is actually going to occur, specifically with a dollar amount, if you can. And then again, thank you strategies, whether that's to donors, to volunteers, to your employees, and then highlighting your impact metrics throughout your marketing collateral or your communication collateral. So on your website, you can have an impact, section. So we see that on a home page. If you go to, your landing page, and you can have an impact section, you can have an entirely separate page that's highlighting your impact results. Having these metrics on your online donation pages and your direct fundraising forms, that works really, really well. Also putting this information into your email campaigns, particularly for end of year or any fundraising campaign. And if you have the bandwidth and you have the data, one of the most helpful marketing or communication pieces that we like to advocate for is an impact report. So similar to an annual report that most organizations have, but just highlighting more of your impact metrics, really helping donors and other stakeholders see how, their involvement is creating actual lasting change. So you're not just telling them your outputs or the number of people you served, number of water wells drilled, number of trees planted, number of school supplies distributed. Those are all outputs and that's important. Stakeholders want to know that. But what they really want to know is the lasting change, how much change is happening over a month's time, a quarter's time, a year's time. And so an impact report is a great sort of long form written PDF that gives you the space to do that. And then you can take snippets from your impact report to highlight that in your email campaigns, on social media, so on and so forth. So those are some of the key components that we see work really well from a marketing, fundraising, overall communication strategy for nonprofits, again, of all shapes and sizes.
That's great. Those are great feedback. One that I want to highlight or pick up and validate things that you've said that we see also work for some of our customers that we work for is the making employees know, not just make them feel like, make them know they are the heroes in your impact story. And one thing that we've intentionally done in our technology with the Sure Impact platform is that every time a staff member logs into Sure Impact, they get to see their own individual impact. So before we let them see their client page with all their clients or their tasks to do or anything like that, we remind them every single day of the great work that they're doing and the impact that we're having. And so, because I too noticed when I was in the consulting realm, like that the turnover in the nonprofit sector, someone earlier today was saying 50% of case managers are turning over any given year. So that not only impacts the organizations, but it also impacts the clients that we're serving, right? So just thank you for highlighting that point. That's so important too. And then also this concept of, being intentional about taking your theory of change, creating it into an impact report, and then using those elements of your impact data into snippets in social media. It's just the elegance of, taking something whole and then taking the pieces and parts for the strategy. So I think that, anyway, just really important stuff for our listeners to hear. So I know that things always are changing in the philanthropic landscape, and you're on the ground and you're talking to nonprofits every single day. What are you noticing in terms of, are you noticing an increase in funders who are requiring outcomes and impact data? Is it, a nice to have, but not a mandatory? Tell us what you're seeing in terms of from the funding and philanthropic landscape.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think in a nutshell, it's an undoubtedly yes. To be a little bit more detailed, yes, it's not just what we see or, what our whole team is seeing on a regular basis, but we look at other studies that are showing just continual increases in, individual donors wanting to see this information. Used to, it was, predominantly granting organizations, family foundations, things of that nature that would request or require impact metrics. And at this point, we're seeing donors of all types, funders of all types, really not just requesting, but more so requiring, sometimes demanding to see this information in order to fund initially or continue funding organizations. So just as some statistics, these are not from our team or surveys that we've sent out. These are other sources that state that 97% of major donors are looking predominantly at the positive impact an organization creates in order to decide, if they're going to fund or continue funding. 2 out of 3 or 66% of donors are looking at the outcomes, not the outputs. So the actual change over time that an organization is creating. And then we see this with younger generations too. So millennials and Gen Z are much more concerned about the social impact, the economic impact, the environmental impact that might be created by an organization. And so we don't foresee this changing or going anywhere anytime soon, because new donors, younger donors are wanting to see this information more and more. So yes, to answer your question, we see this all the time. And donors are, beginning to just expect this information. And if it's not provided, then, eyebrows are raised, questions are asked. And I don't think that anyone is doing it out of malice. I just think that too many people have had experiences where they didn't know where their funds were going, or maybe they did find out that their funds weren't being used as they had expected. And so people just want to be good stewards of their funds, whether they have a little, a moderate, or a lot of funding to provide. Everyone wants to be good stewards of that. And at Social Impact Solutions, we really just like to advocate that just like if someone were investing in a for-profit, they would expect a return on investment, and no one has a problem with those expectations. And donors and funders have, they expect a social return. And so being able to show them, what is being done and changes that are being made. Also not being afraid to highlight where there are gaps and where things have gone wrong, because a lot of funders will want to, support that and help make improvements too.
Yeah, that's great. That's also what we've been seeing too. Something that I've noticed, or and have heard recently from various funders. 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be at a conference called SOCAP that has some of the most innovative impact funders there. And the executive director of an organization called Lever for Change, who people may or may not know who they are, but they were essentially the organization who helps like the Melinda Gates Foundation and the Mackenzie Scotts of the world kind of evaluate or vet the charities in which they're going to make those massive life-changing grants to. And they just, so they're quietly doing research. I mean, now I think Mackenzie Scott has a more open call, but for a while she didn't. And these groups were quietly doing research, and they just assumed that organizations had outcomes and impact data. And so that's who they're looking. Those were like, if you that didn't exist, then you weren't even part of the pool that they were going to select. So anyway,
Right.
I think they're learning now more about the need for capacity building in this space. So hopefully there'll be more opportunities to raise money for building the capacity as well as becoming outcomes driven. But there really is this kind of expectation from funders that this is what data that nonprofits will commit to this to be successful.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm sure you've seen this before, but sometimes we can learn from the failures of others. Have you seen any organizations that missed out on opportunities because they weren't able to communicate their outcomes or impact?
We have, and I could give a long list for that, but I think, just starting out with kind of the perspective, how a lot of organizations come into the initial process of measuring impact data. It seems like a lot of organizations are, they know they need to start measuring impact, or at least do it on a more robust scale if they've already started. And so it seems like the initial driver is we need to start doing this in order to get new funding, to expand funding, future funding is kind of the mentality. But at the same time, what we see oftentimes is that it's the loss of funding that actually gets, nonprofit leaders and the organization as a whole to really make that jump and dive into actionably capturing data. So, 6 months, a year, 2 years might go by before an organization really takes that leap. And in that time frame, a lot of times they have lost funding, and that's what's motivating them to actually take action. And so, to answer your question, an organization comes to mind, and I won't name names because it's, it's nothing derogatory about them. It's just a real example of one of our clients. They're a great organization, well-founded. They've been around for close to 50 years, very established. And I believe it was back in 2019 that within the same fiscal year, they lost two multi-million-dollar grants. And that's what spurred them to start capturing, measuring, and reporting impact data. They, at that point, didn't have any impact data at all. Therefore, they couldn't report it back to the granting organizations, and that's why they lost their funding. Both of these organizations had funded their nonprofit for over 10 years. So it's not like they were, new grants. They weren't applying for new grants. It's not like they had just received this once or twice. Year over year, they had consistently received, millions of dollars from these two granting organizations, and truly not having impact data to report back to them was the only reason that they lost their funding. So, I would consider that a huge missed opportunity. They have survived it, and they have, a great impact measurement plan in place now. And, they have continued to grow over the last several years. So, I'm grateful for them because they do such great work, but I don't want that to be the case. So if there's anyone on the call that, is sort of, well, I don't know if we should do this or if we can do this, definitely encourage you to just start somewhere so that you at least, because it takes time, right? You can't just capture good data in a week or 2 weeks or 2 months even. So to start capturing data and then refine as you go. Don't feel like you have to have a perfect plan on the front end. And then other examples of missed opportunities, I would say, again, this conversation often revolves around funding, and rightfully so. But at the same time, program evaluation, process improvement, it's hard to know what is working well, what needs to be improved upon if data isn't being captured. So I think that is another big common missed opportunity is, you want your programs to be as good as they can be for the people that you're serving, for the communities that you serve at large. And so capturing this data, not just to prove it to funders, but to internally say, okay, what's working well and what do we want to grow and scale? Where are the gaps, and is it our job to fill those gaps, or should we, find a partner to help us with that? So it just gives you so much information to use internally, and, to do a better, more robust SWOT analysis, every year or every quarter, depending on how your organization functions. So I would say those are the biggest missed opportunities would be, loss of funding, not securing new funding, and then also just not knowing internally how to improve or what needs improvement.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think that when organizations have a discipline in their data collection, the funders don't want it just for vanity metrics. They want nonprofits to embrace it for your second point. And that is that when they are constantly using data and they're data driven, they're more likely to innovate and, invest in what works and kind of refine what isn't working. And without that visibility, you're really just kind of, I don't know what you're doing. You're just doing what you think is best, which isn't bad, but that the more evidence you have, the more effective your organization will be. So we are kind of moving into the end of year giving season, fundraising season. A lot of nonprofits' budgets for the end of this year, next year, kind of living in the next 6 weeks or so. And so I know everyone's really eager to hear your advice related to fundraising. So what are some fundraising trends you've seen this year that relate to measuring and communicating impact that we haven't already touched on?
That's a great question. And before I answer that, just would love for anyone that has questions that have come up as we've been chatting, feel free to put those in the chat. I'm happy to answer those as we go along. I personally don't have to wait until the end for questions. I know we can all learn from each other, and everyone can, get more out of this by, you sharing what's worked for you, what hasn't worked. So please feel free to put anything in the chat as we are going along here, even before our Q&A at the end. But back to Sherry's question, just about, fundraising trends that we have seen over the course of this year. 2024, I'm sure for some people, the year has flown by, and for others, it's probably felt like a very long year for many reasons. And I would say, one of the biggest things that we have seen, and I'm sure whether it's on LinkedIn or newsletters or wherever, I think everyone has started to see impact storytelling or data-driven storytelling. Those phrases have kind of been plastered all over the place. And I think they're well intended. I personally think they're overused. So, when we're talking about either one of those things related to nonprofit storytelling, it is really important. And so, what we have seen work really well, and definitely a trend that has emerged and continues to be adopted, is combining quantitative or the numeric data and qualitative or the more anecdotal data, combining the two to where you do have, data being a part of your communication efforts, whether that's a true story narrative or not. We know that donors want to see the data, they want to see the numbers at large to determine, okay, what's the scale, what's the reach of your programs, but they also want to feel connected to your mission. And so using those, qualitative pieces or individual stories of transformation, combining the two really helps donors to, feel like they're a part of something that's bigger than themselves, that they're really contributing to, but also it helps them feel connected to the people or the families, the community that you're actually serving. So I would say that has been a big one that a lot of organizations are starting to adopt, and it works quite well. Another one would be that donors are really wanting to, they want transparency, and not just from an impact metric standpoint, but I was reading an article just this morning about nonprofits adopting AI. And so it actually looks like nonprofits have adopted AI more than for-profits, which is interesting to me. I don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent, but I think just leveraging those new tools is fantastic. But donors, constituents, and others do question how their data is being used, and there are concerns around that. So donor transparency is another one that has emerged pretty aggressively in 2024. Donors, wanting to see that transparency and make sure that their data is being used appropriately. As I just alluded to, AI obviously has gone crazy this year. And so that's great. I think it can save a lot of time for nonprofits who are already, strapped for personnel or time or whatever the resources might be. I would just advocate that you definitely, your whatever platform you're using, whether it's for your marketing, communications, development, you're giving it clear guidelines, and then you're having your team members go back and edit very heavily if you are using AI. So those are some of the biggest trends that I would say that we've seen. Lastly, digital tools and digital dashboards that I'm sure, Sherry, you could speak more to than I could. But whether you're trying to visualize donor data or constituent data, the impact metrics, internal KPIs, there are just so many good tech tools that help you see data in real time and help you keep your data more clean and updated. And so that's another one that I would say has really taken off this year, and that is really helpful for nonprofits in general. And I
That's
also
great.
see a lot of the questions
Yeah.
through the chat if we want to address those. If
Yeah,
not,
let's go ahead and address some of those chat questions because yeah, I agree with you. Let's get the people what they want. So Angie wants to know what are the most common metrics to track?
that is a good question, a broad question.
Yes.
Um, Angie, I personally would love to know more about your organization and what you do before I like really answer that in a lot of detail. Um, I would say starting with outputs, it's hard to get too much into the outcomes or the change that's occurring. So if you don't know how many people you serve, if you don't know how many school supplies you distribute, if you don't know how many volunteers you have engaged, those things are great output baselines to start with. Um, I would also say that, baseline metrics for the people that you serve is really important. So where, the audience that you're serving, whether you call them constituents or beneficiaries, where are they at baseline? Where are they at before they enter your program? And then where are they at, midway through the program or up on completion so that you can measure that pre-post is really important. If you're just sending out a survey after your program has concluded, you can ask for feedback and you can still learn a lot. But if you don't know, say you have an education program, it's great to know where were they at pre-program and where were they at post-program. And then you can really start to measure how your program, is helping them learn, whether that's education, after school tutoring, job training. If you're more public health, healthcare related, maybe you have a program for type 2 diabetes. Well, what were their lab values before the program? What are their lab values after the program? So I think baseline metrics before a program starts or at the start date, and then, post program metrics are really helpful to see. And then the last thing I would advocate for without knowing what your program does is making sure that what you're measuring is also uh, comparable to like national or international metrics. So, make sure that you're asking things that whether it's healthcare, public health, education, job training, you can tie those metrics back to your local community metrics and standards, or your state metrics and standards, or national metrics and standards, so that you have some comps to pull and say, well, this was the rate of homelessness in our community, but for the people we serve, it's 35 times better than that, or whatever your program does. But Sherry, I'd love to know if you have any additions to that question.
Yeah, I think that's actually what I would say too. I mean, we typically talk about the three types of data, what basically who you're serving, so understanding, where they're coming from, whether it's some basic demographics, zip code information, then what did you do? So you talked about that. What are your outputs? How did you engage them in services? And then the third is how are people better off, which is exactly what you talked about. It's pretty hard to discuss better off if we don't know where people were when they started and where they were when they left. And so that's really something that those three types of data points is how we built Sure Impact to think like a theory of change or a logic model for nonprofits, so that nonprofits have those three data points at their fingertips and can answer those three questions at any given time. So yeah, very much aligned. But yeah, I agree with you, Angie. I would encourage you to maybe follow up with Lauren and with some more details. I'm sure she could give you much more targeted advice there about some key metrics. And that's, I think, the challenge. Like I'm sure you feel this way too, Lauren, is the beauty of the nonprofit sector and impact measurement reporting is that we don't have to define everyone in a similar box. The challenge is the same thing. Like, yeah, I wish I could be like the CPAs that are like, well, here's our general standard accounting principles, but everyone's mission is different. Therefore, your theory of change is different. Your impact story is different. So um, everyone's got to be a little, I mean, we can standardize it some across different industries, but we have to be a little more bespoke.
Right.
which is great. And so kind of another challenge that I know many organizations have. So Jones, and she works at an arts museum, and she feels like it's hard to collect impact data because of her, so she's just curious if you have some examples of other metrics they could use for those that engage with her art museum. Have you had any experience with that or any suggestions for her?
Interesting. I wouldn't say specifically with an art museum, but we have worked with a couple of music venues that are more focused on classical styles of music. And so that, there are some similarities there, obviously some differences. For the music venues and the classical music programs that we have worked with, they do have more like students coming to them to learn. They also have programs where they're going out into local schools to teach. So both are happening, students coming to their programs and they are going to other school programs. So I'm not sure, Joan, if your museum does that or if everyone is basically coming in-house, as you would traditionally with, viewing art at your museum. But either way, I think it could be feasible to possibly do a very, very short survey, possibly before and after the students are coming through your program. That might be difficult to do. I know you would have to get different, approvals from different schools, most likely, but at minimum, you could probably survey school administrators and teachers at minimum, and then consider a very short survey for the students themselves, is the first thing that comes to mind. And possibly consider, how you can get more involved or create more of a partnership with local schools. And, having students submit their artwork to be, showcased in your museum, and just some engagement opportunities that would allow you to collect a little bit more information, if there is more of a partnership rather than students just coming, once a year to view your artwork. So that is a more challenging example. I know that advocacy and awareness groups also, it gets a little bit more challenging there as well. But I think there are always opportunities to capture, something, even if it's a 3 to 5 question survey, to give you more information.
Yeah, to follow up on that, Joan, I put in the chat a link to the Institute for Art and Impact. This is a pilot that Sure Impact is involved in, where we are helping arts institutions measure their impact beyond just kind of number of people you serve or people go through your museum. And we're looking at some constructs like empathy and kindness and loneliness and mental health and well-being. So I encourage you to go to that link and check that pilot out. There might be some resources there that could help you as well. These are all really great questions, and I know I could do, I do all day trainings and workshops on this stuff, so this is really exciting. Do you have any sample impact reports that you would refer people to check out?
We do, yes. On our website, we have one that if you go to socialimpactsolutions.com, and then at the top we have an impact reports tab, you can click there and download an impact report. If you want to reach out to me directly, then I could send you some other examples. And we just have a mock impact report, so it's not real data. We are very careful with what we share from our clients. So it is a mock impact report. We also have a mock needs assessment report that we could definitely send over your way. Thank you, Laurel. Laurel just put the URL in there if you want to go over and find our impact report from the website. But definitely feel free to reach out to me as well.
This is thank you. Yeah, go check out those mock reports. Thanks for sharing those, Lauren. Sharon has a really great question that I don't often see people ask, so I really like this one. So when they're thinking about an impact measurement plan, how do we ensure this aligns more with an organization mission vision over donors' requirements, expectations for posterity? Interesting.
That is a really good question. So again, a loaded question.
Yeah.
But the best way to concisely answer that, from my perspective would be, again, getting a theory of change, whether you have one already or not. If you have one already, work on revising it, making sure that it's updated. If you've never done one or it's been a while, creating a new theory of change. And I like to go through the exercise for, say your organization has 3 flagship programs. I like to do a theory of change for each flagship program. And then after that, consider doing a theory of change for the organization overall. Um, and that really can help your marketing team, development team, operations team, and others get on the same page. Everyone's looking at sort of a blueprint, if you will. Everyone, from multiple departments can give different insights and different perspectives. And this just helps you understand, okay, what's required from a, activities and inputs perspective, what's required to get a new program off the ground or to keep this existing program up and running. What are our outputs? What are we doing? And what are we, seeing from an output and an outcome standpoint? And then taking your theory of change and, cross collaborating or cross examining it with your goals and objectives and KPIs and, determining, do your goals and objectives, make sense with your theory of change? Are they advocating for similar things? Are our goals and objectives measurable? So these are 2 really key practices that I think help get an organization on the same page internally, and keep you from, just measuring what you think donors want to know. It ultimately helps you measure what matters most to the organization, what your mission, vision, goals are. And then that's what you're reporting back to donors. You're not changing what you're measuring specifically for funders.
Yeah, yeah. And I think doing that it empowers you to go back to funders and communicate to them, why you're measuring this and why, this measure is kind of more of appropriate over their theory of change than maybe what they're asking for. And now, of course, if it's federal funds or there's some requirements, you might just have to measure that too. But at least you can start to educate the conversation. As a former government funder, I so much appreciated when our grantees came to us and explained to them why they were measuring what they were measuring. And, we often would modify our plan based on what the nonprofits who were doing the work were requiring. So definitely agree with that. Let's see. So Rebecca has a question about resistance to gathering and entering personal information for fear of privacy issues. Do you have any suggestions for language verbiage to encourage to trust the safety of their data?
Yeah, definitely. I think that first and foremost, you can typically, if not always, surveys can be anonymous, feedback forms can be anonymous. So if that's part of the concern, I see Rebecca saying personal information or identifiable information. Right now, I'm working on a project with a hospital system. And so HIPAA compliance and all of that, we're keeping all of our data. It's completely anonymous. So, patient names, date of birth, none of address, phone numbers, none of that is in the data that our team is sorting through. And we can still say, well, here were their pre-labs, here were their post-lab values, here's how it compares, here are their survey results. So depending on what you're trying to do, Rebecca, obviously if you're trying to contact these people as follow-ups, then you need their contact and personal information. If you're trying to capture it from more of an impact perspective, you don't necessarily have to have their contact information. Even if you're doing interviews or focus groups, you can keep all of that information anonymous and confidential. So that is an option, but then whether you have personal information or not, using systems, technology, platforms that, are secure, they're password protected at minimum. But there are so many, I'm not an IT person, so, but there are so many softwares and tech personnel, so much that we can do to protect our databases, whether that's just, your generic donor database system, your marketing database, but certainly when it comes to, constituent data that is more personal and more private, there are lots of good options that are, some of them are very costly, but, I think there are countless options on the market. Again, Sherry, you could probably speak to this more than I could, that keeps your data safe and secure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's really the language, is to talk about how let people know how that personal identifying information will or will not be used. Giving people confidence that it will live in secure, password protected environments, and only so many, like, who will have access to that data. I know with Sure Impact, we've protected personal identifying information by never, like, we have a roll-up model where you can share impact data with funders, but that none of that PII can even go up to a funder, just kind of to ensure that. And we always say, to your point, it doesn't matter if the person's name is Sherry Jones or if the person's name is 54321 Smith, right? But it's that you as the organization needs to understand who that person is, if you need to follow up with them, or if you need to have a personal kind of interaction with them. But in terms of evaluation and telling an impact story, you don't necessarily need to know who that name of that person. So I'm happy to share more with you, Rebecca, on that. Also, Sharon had a follow-up question about the policy document that would guide the impact measurement practices within an organization. I don't know if did you bring that up in your statement?
I don't think that I had referred to it, but it is a really good question. And some organizations, are more formal with this than others. I've seen some organizations that, they don't really have guiding documentation. They don't have, even consistent verbiage. And so over time, as an organization grows and evolves and, there's employee turnover, this is a really important piece that can often be overlooked. And so to my knowledge, Sharon, there isn't necessarily one standard, nonprofit document that is used. We've had some organizations create, strategic plan and guiding principles. We've had other organizations create more of what they call an impact playbook. And so I think what we advocate for is, something that's already functioning within your organization. So not trying to come in and change everything that you're already doing, but what procedures and processes and verbiage and documentation do you already have in place? And then just adding to your existing strategic plan, if you will, and adding the impact measurement piece on there, because a lot of times impact measurement is already a challenge. It's already, posing some barriers internally. And so in order to avoid adding more of that, we don't, advocate for one particular document or strategy style, but just getting it, in writing and the processes implemented into your existing strategic plan.
That's great advice. Absolutely. So I can't believe it, we're already at the hour. This is amazing. This has been a great interactive conversation. I am going to have one more follow-up question, but I do want to let the group know that we'll follow up with this recording with all of our contact information. And coming up on November 19th, at 1 p.m., Sure Impact will be offering a group demo. So if you've heard everything Lauren said and is interested in how Sure Impact kind of systematizes this all for you, and you have that impact measurement at your fingertips, we would invite you to join us on November 11th at 1 p.m. So in our last remaining minutes, Lauren, I'm just curious, as we think towards 2025, what are your last kind of parting thoughts and parting tips that our nonprofit listeners can do to get ready to increase their impact and raise more money?
It's a really good question. And I agree, Sherry, it's gone by so fast. I love the interaction and the questions and the conversation. So it's been great. And I hope that it has been for everyone else on the call too. For 2025, which seems crazy that it's almost here already. I think my biggest piece of advice would be for organizations that, aren't capturing data yet. Start somewhere and start small. So whether you're using Sure Impact, or, I wouldn't necessarily advocate for a spreadsheet, but start somewhere and be okay with starting small. It doesn't have to be a perfect plan. It will evolve. It's not just that it can, but as your organization grows and changes, your plan will evolve and change. So starting with a theory of change, like we talked about earlier, making sure that your goals and objectives are in place and measurable and aligned with your theory of change. I would say, making sure that you're using validated and reliable assessment tools is something that we advocate for pretty strongly. Otherwise, you don't really know if your data is all that reliable. And then, as we've talked about, just continuing to utilize different technology platforms. It can save your team so much time. Sometimes it feels like spreadsheets or paper forms are easier on the front end, but in the long run, it just creates so much more work for your team members. So much data is lost. If we're going to talk about, security and confidentiality, that's oftentimes lost. So looking into tech platforms like Sure Impact, and exploring all of the options that are out there, because there are more and more of them by the week, it feels like, which I know can be overwhelming, but just knowing that there are really good software technology platforms out there to really help nonprofits, specifically nonprofits, really leverage the data that they're capturing, keep it secure, and report it back to stakeholders. And then my last piece that, just since we are talking about more of the measurement and the marketing or communication side today, I think something that has been really lost, especially since COVID and our world has gone so virtual, which is not all bad. Something that we see is that organizations that still have in-person touch points. So like the art museum example that was brought up earlier, organizations that are consistently meeting with people in person, whether you're having a fundraising event, you're setting up a golf tournament, you're setting up, a 5K. I know that a lot of people hear this and they're like, we don't want more work, but just understand that everyone wants, that personal connection, that in-person connection. And so highlighting your impact metrics at in-person events is a really great way to connect with any and every type of stakeholder. So don't lose out on that in 2025. Virtual, remote, hybrid work is great, but just not losing the connection and the personal piece is a huge one.
Thank you. That is some great advice. And tell everybody how they can find you. We'll send that information out in the follow-up, but they're wanting to read more or learn more, where can they find you again?
Yes, so I'll put this in the chat. We have a free resource. It's our fundraising quiz. If you go to fundraisingquiz.org, so that will give you some information about measuring and marketing your impact, specifically for fundraising. You can find me on LinkedIn, and then you can also visit our website. So I put all three of those links in the chat just now. And yeah, I really appreciate Sherry and Laurel having me today, and would love to follow up with anyone that has questions about how to measure and market your impact, and how, they could work with our team.
Thank you very much. This has been a blast. I so appreciate your time, Lauren. Thanks everyone for joining us. And I used to say this in my old work, but until next time, keep measuring and achieving excellence.